هذا التسجيل هو عمل تطوعي مقدم من مبادرة بصيرة للأشخاص المكفوفين وضعاف البصر بالتعاون مع المجلس الأعلى لحقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. Grade 7 Students Book Module 5 Elementary, my dear Watson. Outcomes. After Module 5, you will be able to 1. Predict the meanings of new vocabulary items. 2. Talk about the greatest detectives throughout history using the past simple tense. 3. Practice the comparative and the superlative degrees to talk about qualities of great detectives. 4. Listen to a story to act it out. 5. Read about famous detectives. And 6. Write a detective story. Page 55, Exercise 1. Read the following conversation. Why do you think Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are such famous characters? Sherlock Holmes sat at the breakfast table and gave me a walking stick. There was something written on it. To Mr. James Mortimer, from his friends, 1884. Well, Watson, what can you tell me about the owner of the stick? Asked Holmes. I think that Mr. Mortimer is an old country doctor. His patients like him, so they gave him this walking stick. Good, said Holmes. Why do you think he's a country doctor? Because the stick is very scratched. A city doctor does not carry such an old stick. Holmes took the stick from my hands and looked at it. Interesting. I think the man is a country doctor, but he is not old. He's a young, pleasant, and absent-minded doctor. How did you know that? Elementary, my dear Watson. Only pleasant people get presents, and only absent-minded men forget their sticks. Exercise 2. Go to the glossary pages in the activity book, pages 74 till 76, or use a classroom dictionary and look up the meaning of the words you don't know. The words are owner, patient, conclusion, method, interested, elementary, absent-minded, scratched, intelligent, famous, wise, kind, logical, professional, and pleasant. Now, let's read their meanings together. Owner, someone who has something belonging to them. Patient, someone receiving medical treatment from a doctor. Conclusion, something you decide after considering all the information you have. Method, a planned way of doing something, especially one that a lot of people know about. Interested, giving a lot of attention to something because you want to find out more about it or because you enjoy it. Elementary, not complicated. Absent-minded, likely to forget things, especially because you are thinking about something else. Scratched, of markings made on a hard surface with a sharp object. Intelligent, clever, famous, something or someone that is known to everyone. Wise, describing someone who makes good decisions, gives good advice, or etc. Kind, saying or doing things that show that you care about other people. Logical, seeming reasonable and sensible. Professional, related to a job that needs special education and training. Pleasant, friendly, polite, and easily loved. Exercise 3. How did Sherlock Holmes find out who the owner of the stick was? In a group, use the same method to identify the owner of an object. Exercise 4. Do you want to be a detective? What makes a good detective? In a group, make a list of the characteristics of a good detective. Use the words from Exercise 2 to guide you. Page 56. The best detective of all time. Exercise 1. Read and answer. Do you know these characters? They are famous professional detectives: Sherlock Holmes, Miss Jane Marple, and Hercule Poirot. People all over the world read stories of their adventures or watch them on DVDs. These three detectives were very different. Sherlock Holmes is more famous than Poirot and Miss Marple. In fact, he's the most famous detective of all time. The basis of his method was observation, and observation. After observing an object, he made logical conclusions. Hercule Poirot was less interested in details than Sherlock Holmes. He was more interested in studying the mind of the suspects. He thought that the best tools to solve a crime were the little gray cells in the brain, so he sat quietly and thought. Miss Jane Marple is less famous than Holmes or Poirot, but more pleasant than them. She didn't look like a detective at all. She lived in a small village in the country, and she used her experience of life in her village to solve crimes. She was wiser than Holmes because she was older than him. In fact, she was the oldest of the three. A. How did Sherlock Holmes solve crimes? B. According to Poirot, what are the best tools to solve a crime? C. Why was Miss Marple unusual? D. Which of the qualities listed in exercise 1 on page 55 describes the three detectives the best? Page 57, Grammar. In this module, we will be learning about the comparative, the superlative, and irregular comparatives and superlatives. Let's start. The comparative. We use the comparative to compare two people or things. For example, Sherlock Holmes is wiser than Dr. Watson. We use ER plus than to form the comparative of one-syllable adjectives or two-syllable adjectives that end in Y. Example 1. Miss Marple was older than Hercule Poirot. Example 2. She was brainier than other women detectives. We use more or less plus than to form the comparative of two-syllable adjectives that do not end in Y and adjectives with more than two syllables. Example 1. Miss Marple is more famous than Poirot. Example 2. Poirot is less logical than Holmes. The superlative. We use the superlative to compare more than two people or things. For example, Miss Marple is the oldest detective. We use the plus est at the end of a word to form the superlative of one-syllable adjectives or two-syllable adjectives that end in Y. For example, Miss Marple is the wisest, brainiest of women detectives. We use the most plus adjective to form the superlative of two-syllable adjectives that do not end in Y and adjectives with more than two syllables. Example 1. Sherlock Holmes is the most famous detective in history. Example 2. Poirot was the most arrogant detective ever. Irregular comparatives and superlatives. Good and bad are irregular adjectives. Their comparative are better than and worse than. The same rule applies to the compound adjective well known. Example 1. Holmes was a better detective than Watson. Example 2. Poirot was a worse detective than Holmes. Example 3. Poirot is better known than Miss Marple. The superlative of good and bad are the best and the worst. Example 1. Wolfe was the best detective in New York. Example 2. Clouseau is the worst detective in history. Example 3. Holmes is the world's best known detective. Now let's go back to page 57. Grammar, the past simple, irregular verbs. Exercise 1. In pairs, find the past simple forms of these irregular verbs in the text on pages 55 and 56. The verbs are sit, take, think, give, make. Now, let's answer them. The past simple form of sit is sat. The past simple form of take is took. The past simple form of think is thought. The past simple form of give is gave. The past simple form of make is made. Exercise 2. Now in pairs, complete this dialogue with the verbs from the list. 2 words are used more than once. The words are was, thought, where, became, wrote. Let's start. The character Sherlock Holmes, blank, a professional detective. He, blank, fame, blank, not important. Watson, blank, his stories for people to know Holmes' role in them. Holmes' tools, blank, science, logic, and observation of small details. His techniques such as examining fingerprints, later, blank, a reality in police investigations. Next time you are in London, visit his famous apartment at 221B Baker Street. It, blank, a museum in 1951. Now let me reread the passage with the blanks filled. The character Sherlock Holmes was a professional detective. He thought fame was not important. Watson wrote his stories for people to know Holmes' role in them. Holmes' tools were science, logic, and observation of small details. His techniques, such as examining fingerprints, later became a reality in police investigations. Next time you are in London, visit his famous apartment at 221B Baker Street. It became a museum in 1951. Exercise 4. The comparative. Compare the 2 books in the photos. Use the adjectives in the list to write sentences. The adjectives are big, small, thick, famous, old, colorful. We have 2 books, an encyclopedia, which is big and a bit old, and a small story, which is very colorful. Let me repeat the adjectives that you should use to make your sentences. Big, small, thick, famous, old, colorful. For example, we can say, the encyclopedia is bigger than the book. Exercise 5. Complete this dialogue with the correct form of the adjectives in brackets. Ra'id said, I saw one of Poirot's stories on TV yesterday. Fatima replied, Poirot? I don't like him. I only love Miss Marple. Ra'id said, Miss Marple? That boring old lady. Fatima then said, she's not boring. In any case, she's blank, boring than Poirot. Ra'id said, she's blank, intelligent than Sherlock Holmes. Holmes and Poirot are blank, logical, and blank, professional than Miss Marple. Fatima then said, maybe, but she is blank, between parentheses, old, and blank, between parentheses, wise than them. Ra'ed then said, in any case, I like detective stories. They are blank, interesting than romantic novels. Now let me reread the passage with the right answers. Ra'ed, I saw one of Poirot's stories on TV yesterday. Fatima said, Poirot? I don't like him. I only love Miss Marple. Ra'ed said, Miss Marple? That boring old lady. Fatima said, she is not boring. In any case, she is less boring than Poirot. Ra'ed said, she is less intelligent than Sherlock Holmes. Holmes and Poirot are more logical and more professional than Miss Marple. Fatima said, maybe, but she's older and wiser than them. Ra'ed then said, in any case, I like detective stories. They are more interesting than romantic novels. Page 58. Exercise 7. Complete the text by the new detective Samir. Use the comparative form of the adjectives from the list. The adjectives are courageous, patient, logical, intelligent, hard. Let's start. Hello, I'm Samir. I finally passed the test and became a real detective, but Joe didn't. It wasn't so easy. In fact, it was blank than we expected. I was blank than Joe and didn't give up thinking about the solutions of the different problems. The head detective said that I was blank than Joe since all the solutions I suggested made perfect sense. Although Joe is blank than I am, he couldn't solve all the problems. I think he was a bit scared of failing. I was blank than him and didn't care about the test results. Now let me read the passage with the right answers. Hello, I'm Samir. I finally passed the test and became a real detective, but Joe didn't. It wasn't so easy. In fact, it was harder than we expected. I was more patient than Joe and didn't give up thinking about the solutions of different problems. The head detective said that I was more logical than Joe since all the solutions I suggested made perfect sense. Although Joe is more intelligent than I am, he couldn't solve all the problems. I think he was a bit scared of failing. I was more courageous than him and didn't care about the test results. The superlative. Exercise 8. Complete this table with the superlative form of the adjectives. Adjective 1, old. In comparative, older. Superlative, the oldest. Adjective 2, pleasant. In comparative, more pleasant. In superlative, the most pleasant. Now complete the following. Adjective 3, hot. In comparative, hotter. What is it in superlative? Adjective 4, famous. In comparative, more famous. What is it in superlative? Adjective 5, good. In comparative, better. What is it in superlative? Adjective 6, bad. In comparative, worse. What is it in superlative? Exercise 9. Read each situation and decide which of the two sentences, A or B, is correct. 1. Sherlock Holmes is a very well-known character. A. He is the more famous detective of all time. B. He is the most famous detective of all time. 2. Poirot was an arrogant man. A. He thought he was the better detective in the world. B. He thought he was the best detective in the world. 3. Holmes and Poirot are younger than Miss Marple. A. Miss Marple is the most old detective. B. Miss Marple is the oldest detective. 4. Everyone loved Miss Marple. A. She became the most popular detective in history. B. She became the more popular detective in history. Now, write a situation like the above ones about Holmes, Poirot, or Miss Marple. Ask your partner to guess the correct answer. Over to you. Exercise 10. In pairs, discuss the qualities of each detective. What do you prefer? Skill focus, the lost bag. Page 60. Listening. Exercise 3. Listen to this story which an old man is telling to his grandchildren. Then act it out with 3 of your classmates. Let's start. The lost bag. A long time ago, there lived a rich merchant. He was always dressed nicely and he carried many fine jewels with him. He traveled from one city to another. A band of camels and servants often traveled behind him in a long line. His business was buying and selling goods. He was very good and kind to poor people. Once, the merchant was traveling with a lot of money. As he was on his way back home, his money bag fell to the ground, but he did not notice it. He only discovered the loss of his money when he reached home. The merchant did not worry about the lost bag. He still had enough money for himself and for helping others. Then, there came a time when business was not so good. He became an old man with very little money. The poor merchant sold everything he had, and soon he did not have any money at all. Very often, he and his wife had nothing to eat, and then one cold night. His wife said, "We have no more food. Let us walk to the next village where no one knows us. Someone will help poor people like us." And so they walked in the cold night air. They wandered for a long time until they reached the first house in the next village. The wife was too tired to walk anymore. She fell down on the steps and began to cry. The sheikh who lived in the house heard her and opened the door. The sheikh said, "Who are you? What are you doing here at this time of night?" The merchant and his wife told him their sad story. The sheikh asked them to come in. The sheikh said, "What color was your bag?" The merchant said, "It was a round black bag with a string around it. Inside were some jewels and 1,000 dinars. The sheikh then said, "It is late and you must be very tired. Eat some hot food and rest with us for the night. Tomorrow you will feel better." The next morning, they all sat around the table for breakfast. The sheikh pulled an old black bag from a box. The sheikh said, "Now, I have a story to tell you. A long time ago, I found this bag on the road near my house. I hid it away safely. I knew that someday I could return it to its real owner. Now, I am sure you are the person. Is this the bag you lost?" The merchant said, "Yes, it is. It's the bag that I lost. I cannot tell you how thankful I am. I will always remember how kind you were to me." Page 61. Reading. Exercise 4. Read the story on page 60 and answer these questions. A. How did the merchant become poor? B. How did the sheikh know that the merchant was the real owner of the bag? C. Why didn't the sheikh spend the money he found? D. What would you do with the money you gained back from the sheikh if you were the merchant? Exercise 5. In pairs, fill in the blanks with the verbs from the list. The verbs are investigated, knew, robbed, came, saw, arrived, made, followed. Let's start. Someone blank a bank in the city. A very famous detective blank from another country and blank a plan to solve the mystery. When he blank at the bank, he blank the way the thief broke in through a glass window. He blank the guard and blank that his footprints were always next to the broken glass. So this is how he blank that the guard was the thief. Now let me reread the passage with the right answers. Someone robbed a bank in the city. A very famous detective came from another country and made a plan to solve the mystery. When he arrived at the bank, he investigated the way the thief broke in through a glass window. He followed the guard and saw that his footprints were always next to the broken glass. So, this is how he knew that the guard was the thief. Speaking strategies, interacting in discussions. Don't be the only one speaking. Listen to what the other person says. When you want to say something, wait for the other person to pause. Invite the other person to speak, asking his/her opinions. Example, what do you think about? Speaking. Exercise 7. In a group, discuss the merchant's story, following the speaking strategies above. What do you think about the sheikh's action? What would you do if you found a bag full of money? How would you try to find the owner? Take down notes. Page 62. Communication workshop. Writing a detective story. Before you start, check the meanings of these words, then read the story. Frightened. Suspect. Ransom. To cover up. To kidnap. To investigate. Victims. Police officer. Let's start. Hayek went to see the Jordanian police on Thursday morning. He was very frightened. I think somebody wants to kidnap me tonight, officer, he said. Why do you think so? Asked the police officer. This started 3 days ago. I usually get back home late from work and go right to bed. On Monday, I heard my new neighbor who lives next door arguing with his wife. I don't see anything wrong, said the police officer. They were discussing the same plan on Tuesday and Wednesday. The neighbor said, Omar and Walid are going to break into the flat next door on Thursday night. Omar takes all the money and Walid will cover up for him. What if they kidnap the man? Omar and Walid will kidnap him and ask the Jordanian police for a ransom, his wife said. Said the police officer. Who are your new neighbors? Let us investigate them. They are Mr. Ibrahim and Sousan Yusuf, said Mr. Hayek. Ibrahim and Sousan Yusuf, said the police officer. This case is not so difficult. There would be no victims. You don't watch TV very often, do you? How did the police officer know? Speaking and writing, exercise 1. In a group, discuss the story and find the solution to the case. Consider the following questions. Why was Mr. Hayek worried? What did the policeman know about the suspects? Exercise 2. In a group, solve this case answering the following questions. A. What happened? B. Where did it happen? C. Who did it? D. How did it happen? E. Why did she do it? Let's start. One night, a panda disappeared from its cage in the zoo. In the morning, the zookeepers found the door of the circular cage was open. Nobody knew where the panda was. Only 3 men had keys to the zoo. A detective arrived and interviewed the 3 men. Where were you the night the panda was stolen? I was having dinner at home with my family, said the zoo owner. I was cleaning the corners of the cage, said the zoo cleaner. I was feeding the lions, said the manager. Who lied? How did the detective know? Exercise 3. In a group, write your own story and illustrate it. Then tell it to the class. Don't give them the answer. Let them think and then tell you. Use the story above as an example. Page 63, Language Development. Exercise 1. Complete this passage with the correct comparative or superlative form of the adjectives in brackets. Let's start. Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe are blank between brackets famous American detectives. Spade is blank between brackets not wise and blank between brackets not intelligent than Marlowe. Marlowe is blank between brackets popular than Spade. He's also a blank between brackets good man than Sam Spade. Marlowe enjoys chess and poetry, and he is blank between brackets kind than Spade. Now let me reread the passage with the right answers. Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe are the most famous American detectives. Spade is not wiser and not more intelligent than Marlowe. Marlowe is more popular than Spade. He's also a better man than Sam Spade. Marlowe enjoys chess and poetry, and he is kinder than Spade. Exercise 3. In pairs, take turns to use the following verbs in sentences about things you did yesterday. The winner is the one who makes the most correct sentences. The verbs are be, buy, do, forget, give, meet, read, run, see, think, write. For example, I forgot to turn off my computer yesterday. Exercise 4. Use these words to ask questions about the different detective stories throughout this module. 1. What, between brackets, Dr. Mortimer receive? For example, what did Dr. Mortimer receive? Now complete the following. 2. Where, between brackets, Miss Marple live? 3. What, between brackets, Hercule Poirot used to solve a crime? 4. What, between brackets, Marlowe enjoy? Exercise 5. Now, answer the questions that you made. Exercise 6. Use these words to write sentences. 1. Detective looked like Holmes. A. Miss Marple didn't, but. 2. Poirot than Holmes kinder. Miss Marple is and. 3. Observed before and. Conclusions. Holmes object making. 4. Smart was Poirot. 5. Holmes. No. People. Many. Sherlock. Now let's answer them. 1. Holmes looked like a detective, but Miss Marple didn't. 2. Miss Marple is kinder than Holmes and Poirot. 3. Holmes observed an object before making conclusions. 4. Poirot was smart. 6. Many people know Sherlock Holmes. Page 64. Vocabulary. 1. A person who has something for himself is an owner. 2. Someone who is known by many people is a famous person. 3. A crime is a bad action that is punished by law. 4. The end of a difficult situation or problem is a solution. 5. Someone who is clever is intelligent. 6. People think he committed a crime. He is a suspect. 7. An exciting experience is an adventure. 8. Someone who is good at his or her job is professional. 9. The mark that stays on the objects you touch and that the police use to find a criminal is a fingerprint.